Everybody, all right, we're actually nearing the end of our unit on imaginary numbers and our whole unit on adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing polynomials. So that's kind of exciting. This is the last little bit that we're going to do, and then on Monday we're actually going to do it again, but just more or less kind of bring everything together and just clarify anything before you guys get that test review packet to start reviewing. So let's see if you guys remember what we've been talking about the last couple days. So I thought we could actually go through a problem in your homework just to kind of review. So remember that if you get something like I to the 205th and you're trying to simplify it, you don't know what I to the 205th is, but you do know what I squared is. If there's one thing that you need to memorize, it's I squared. Okay, I can force I squared to look like I to the 205th. Okay, I can raise this to the 102nd power, and then that's actually saying I to the 204th power, which means I need to add another I. So I need to actually multiply by another I. And now I have I to the 205th power. Okay? Alright, so then I did this because I want to replace I squared with -1. I want to raise that to the 102nd power times I. Well, -1 raised to an even power just means that I'm going to have 1 times I, which is just I. Okay? Same idea for number 2. So you have -15, your I to the 311th. Again, I want to start with saying I know it's I squared. What do I need to raise it to get to 311? Well, I could raise it to 150, let's say it'd be 300, 150, so 155. That's going to get me to 311. And then I need one more I to get me to, or sorry, that's going to get me to 310. I need another I to get to 311. We'll give you a little bit more reasonable numbers, definitely, on a test where we would take the calculator away from there. Alright, so I have -15. I squared is -1, which is why I wrote it that way, raised to an odd power times I. So this right here, raised to an odd power, is going to give me -1. And -1 times I is -I. Well, -15 times -I is just positive 15I. Okay, so now let's go into the lesson. So today, we're going to talk about adding, subtracting, and multiplying complex numbers. We mostly talked about adding and subtracting yesterday, so now we're going to add and multiplying. Okay? Alright, so the warm-up. Why don't you guys try the warm-up, and then pause it, unpause it, and you can listen to the explanation of how to do it. I'm going to go kind of quick, though. Okay, so let's check your answers. 3 times -5 makes -15. X to the 4 times x to the 8th makes x. Here I'm multiplying 4. Here I'm multiplying 8, which actually means I'm multiplying a total of 12. Okay, I add those exponents there. In the next one, notice I have two things in parentheses. I have a 3 and an x to the 9. The 4 needs to be distributed to both of those. So this is actually saying 3 to the 4th power. And then here's when I multiply because I'm raising an exponent to an exponent. So 9 times 4 gives me 36. Okay, I don't want to leave my answer like that. I need to actually evaluate it. 3 to the 4th means 3 times 3 is 9, times 3 is 27, times 3 is 81, x to the 36th power. Don't leave your answers 3 to the 4th. Okay, next, we want to do order of operations, which means I actually want to simplify this first. I need to distribute the 5 to the 2, so that's 2 to the 5th. X, 4 times 5 is 20. So 2 to the 5th is 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, 5 times, which you should have gotten 32x to the 20th. Okay? The top part, I can combine that, and I can get 16. X to the 3rd times x to the 9th means I'm multiplying x to the 12th. And then I get 32x to the 20th here. Okay? 16 and 32, just treat it like a fraction. Okay? That's 1/2. So 1/2. And then x to the 12th and x to the 20th. This, we haven't talked about this in a while, but if you go think back to when we first talked about rules of exponents, if there's 12 x's being multiplied on top and 20 on bottom, 12 of them are going to cancel out, and it's going to leave you with 8 in the denominator. So my answer is actually 1/2x to the 8th. Okay? Alright, let's go into today's lesson. So let's multiply. Okay, we spent most of yesterday doing adding and subtracting. Today's going to focus on multiplying. So I times 5i, you just want to think about it as the same as if I did this. So 5i times I is I squared, and we're always going to simplify now that we can simplify I. Okay, you should always reduce it down to an I. So I squared is negative 1. 5 times negative 1 is what gets me negative 5. Okay? Next one. So I have a lot of multiplication going on here. I want to multiply my numbers. 2 and 120 makes 240. I times I to the third makes I to the fourth. Okay, so multiplying 1i times 3 more, I get I to the fourth. And now I need to simplify this. So this gives me 240 times I squared. I'm going to need to raise this to the second power. Okay? Well, that's negative 1 to the second power. Negative 1 squared is 1 times 240, so my answer is 240. You may not need to do as much work as I just did, but make sure you're not skipping too many steps. When we do that, we tend to make a lot of mistakes. Okay? Alright, next one. I don't have any coefficient in front of I to the 10th, so I just have negative 9. If I have I to the 10th times I to the 5th, I'm adding my exponents. 10 plus 5 is 15. Okay? You may want to do maybe like side work. Maybe you could say like, okay, well, I to the 15th is I squared. I'm going to raise this to the 7th power. That gives me 14, and there's 15. Okay? That's negative 1 to the 7th power times I. So this gives me negative 1 times I gives me negative I. So this means I'm saying negative 9 times negative I, which gives me a positive 9i. Okay? Next one. Number 4. Alright, binomials. I have a binomial times a binomial, so that gives me 28. This gives me plus 21i. This gives me plus 8i. And this, be careful that we don't just say 6. We have to remember that's I times I, which gives me I squared. Okay, I can combine these two terms. I can also look at this and say, I know what I squared is. I squared is negative 1. So this means that I have 28. 21 plus 8 is 29i. And 6 times negative 1 is negative 6. Remember that I squared is negative 1. So that means these are actually both real numbers, and I can combine them and make 22 plus 29i. Okay, and remember, this is the only way that our answer should be written. It is in the form of a plus bi. Okay, that's our standard form, real plus imaginary. Okay, let's try it again. Let's multiply here. We get negative 10. Multiply here. We get positive 55i. Middle terms, we get 12i. And then the last terms, we get negative 66. Don't forget your I squared. Okay, again, I can combine my middle terms. So I have negative 10 plus 67i. And then remember that I squared is negative 1. Negative 1 times a negative makes that a positive 66. Okay, and then again, I can combine those numbers. Negative 10 and 66 makes 56 plus 67i. Okay, real plus imaginary. Alright, we're moving. Alright, number 6. Alright, I have a lot of things going on with this one, but most importantly, I want to notice order of operations. Okay, first I need to distribute. That gives me negative 36 I to the 5th. Negative times a negative makes a positive 12. 4 plus 5 is 9. Plus 17 plus 6i to the 5th. Okay? Now, I want to be careful to do this. I see 4 terms. 1, 2, 3, 4. But notice that this is I to the 5th and I to the 5th. I don't want to go through and do 1, 2, 3 times simplify I if I don't need to. Okay? I can see that these are like terms. So I'm going to say, well, if I have negative 36 and I have positive 6, that means I have negative 30 I to the 5th plus a 12 I to the 9th plus 17. So I do need to do some side work, but now I only have to do it twice instead of 3 times. So I need to figure out what I to the 5th is. So I'm going to come over here and do I to the 5th is I squared raised to the second power, that's 4, and there's 5. Okay, this is negative 1. So at this point, we might actually be able to, we've been doing this for a couple of days, we might actually be able to skip some of this and go, okay, that's negative 1 squared, which is 1, times I is just I. If you need to write it all out, write it all out. Okay, I to the 9th is I squared times, or raised to the 4th, that gives me 8, and that's 9. So this is negative 1 raised to the 4th power is raised to an even power is a positive 1 times I, which gives me I. Okay, so that means that this is negative 30, and I can replace I to the 5th with I, plus 12, and I can replace I to the 9th with I, plus. So I have negative 30 i's plus 12 i's. I want my real number first, so 17. Negative 30 plus 12 means that I have negative 18 I. And that's my real plus imaginary. Okay, let's try it again. Alright, before I start changing anything over here, I'm actually going to see what's going on over here. So order of operations, I cannot multiply that 2 until I do the exponent. This exponent needs to go to the 3, and it needs to go to the 7. Okay, so this is actually 2 times 3 to the 3rd, not 3 times not 3, is 27, 3 times 3 times 3, times I to the 21st. Okay, and then this is negative 2 I to the 8th plus this. Alright, I'm going to distribute. I get 54i to the 21st. I can bring this down. So I have 2 i's that I need to simplify. So I'm going to do some work over here. I to the 8th is I squared raised to the 4th. So that means I have negative 1 raised to the 4th. Well, that's just a positive 1. I have I to the 21st, which is I squared raised to the 10th, so that's 20, and that's 1. Okay, so it's negative 1 raised to an even power, so that's just 1, times I, so that's I. Okay, again, if you need to write all this out, write all of that out. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to replace. Negative 2, my I to the 8th was 1, plus 54, my I to the 21st is I. So my real is negative 2, my imaginary is plus 54i. There's my answer. Alright, let's flip it over. Alright, how many more we got? We got 2, 4, 6. Okay, not too bad. Alright, remember that you cannot take this and distribute here. You're going to always miss your middle term if you do that. So this is where we have to expand. Okay, this is what, oops, sorry. This is where we want to say 10 plus 4i times 10 plus 4i. Okay, write it out, otherwise you will forget that middle term. So 10 times 10, 100. 10 times 4i is 40i. This gives me another 40i. And this gives me plus 16i squared. So it looks pretty much like the first 4 problems we did. These two give me 80i. Bring down my 100. I squared is negative 1 times positive 16 gives me negative 16. These are like terms. So that gives me 84 plus 80. And that's my real plus imaginary. Okay, same thing as what we did on the front side, just a little bit different way to write it. Okay, next one. So in the parentheses is adding. They're not like terms, so I can't do it. So but what I can do is I can distribute. Okay, just make sure you take that negative with it. So I'm going to drop down the 8. Negative 3 times 6 is negative 18, and then I have to bring the I squared with it. Okay. You know what? You can actually distribute. I'm going to make this a little bit easier, actually. So I caught the fact that that was an I squared. So I would actually replace this, and I would say, okay, I squared is negative 1 times a negative 3 means that this is actually 8. Negative 1 times negative 3 is positive 3 times 6 plus 2i to the 10th. And now I can distribute a 3 instead of a 3i squared. Okay? You would have gotten the same answer before, just a little bit more work. Alright, so I'm going to bring down my 8. 3 times 6 is 18. 3 times 2 is 6, and I have to bring my I to the 10th with it. Okay, so I'm going to do a little side work here. So I to the 10th is I squared raised to the 5th. Well, I squared is negative 1, and if I raise it to an odd power, it's still negative 1. So 8 plus 18 is 26, plus 6, and then instead of times I to the 10th, I'm going to multiply it by negative 1. So that actually gives me negative 6, plus 26 is 20. So with all those imaginary numbers, I actually ended up with a real. Alright, next one. Before I can do any of the multiplication, I have to deal with the exponent here. So this is negative 9. 9 times 11 is 99. So this looks pretty similar to one of the beginning problems that we did. Alright, so I squared times, let's see, what do we need to multiply by? 49. So 49 times 2 gives me 98, so I need one more. Right, again, this is negative 1 raised to the 49 times I. So I know I'm going to have negative 1 times. Negative 1 to an odd power is negative 1 times I gives me negative 1. Multiply, I get 9. Okay? If at any point you guys want to pause and try these on your own before you hear me do it, by all means try. You should be trying. Maybe it'll be a little bit easier for you too if you can check your work and not just listen to me go through problem after problem. Okay, so if you want, pause it and try this one. Okay, order of operations. Before I do anything with this, I'm actually going to distribute over here. Remember, this 4 has to go to the 2 and to that 13. Okay, so I'm going to drop down 17i to the 24th plus 2 to the 4th would be 2 times 2 is 4 times 2 is 8 times 2 is 16. 13 times 4 is 52. Okay, remember, when you multiply by 4, it just means you double twice. So 13 doubled is 26, doubled is 52. Okay. Unfortunately, those are two different powers of I, so I have to figure out what both of them are. So I to the 24th is the same as I squared raised to the 12th, which just means that's negative 1 raised to the 12th. So it is positive 1. So 17 times 1. This would be I squared, and half of 52 is 26. So that would be plus 16 times, that'd be negative 1 to an even power, which is just positive 1. So if you notice, I have 17 plus 16, which is 33. So it's a lot of imaginary numbers. I end up coming up with a real number. Alright, 2 more. Alright, so we got to do binomial times a binomial. So here I go. I have I add the exponents, so to the 9th. Here, I have minus 5. Oh my gosh, I keep doing this to you guys. This is what you guys should actually be looking for, and I keep catching myself. This right here is I squared. That came up yesterday in yesterday's books as well. If this is I squared, it's going to be a lot easier just to remember that that's negative 1, which means that I actually have I to the 7th plus 8. And in this set of parentheses, I have negative 1 minus 5, which is negative 6. Much easier to distribute this. So negative 6 times I to the 7th is negative 6i to the 7th. Negative 6 times 8 is minus 48. So I only need to do this once now. So I to the 7th is I squared raised to the, raised to the third. That gives me 6, and then that's 7. So I squared is negative 1 to an odd power is still negative 1 times I. Okay, so this means I have negative 6 times, instead of I to the 7th, it's negative I minus 48. Okay, now I need to make sure I write my real first. Make sure you bring the negative with it. Negative 48. Negative times a negative is a positive 6i. And that's what I get. Okay. If you need to go back and try this again or re-listen to any part, feel free. Okay, let's do our last one. Alright. order of operations. Be very aware of order of operations. The denominator is actually already simplified, so I don't really need to worry about it, but I do need to worry about this top. Okay, that top part is again saying it's 4 to the third, and then times I, 7 times 3 is 21. Remember that exponent has to be distributed to all of those terms in there. 4 to the third is 4 times 4, which is 16, times another 4, which is 64i to the 21st, and then this is all over 80i to the 13th. Okay, so I treat my numbers here just like it's a fraction. I could divide both of those by 8. Okay, if I divide both by 8, I get 8/10, which can still be simplified, so I could have divided them by 16. But this is fine. So I get 4/5. And then pay attention to your i's. I have I to the 21st and I to the 13th. Remember, that means, if you think back to when this was written, that means that I would have 21 of these on top, so on all the way to 21. And then at the bottom, I would have 13 of them, so on all the way to get to 13. So you know that you're going to have more on top. The question is how much more once they start canceling out. So all 13 are going to cancel, and then on the top, I'm going to be left with 8 of them. Okay, now again, I don't want to leave my answer like this because I have I to the 8th. I never want to leave anything larger than an I. So let's see what I get. I'm just going to do some work over here. So I to the 8th is I squared raised to the 4th, which is -1 raised to the 4th power is just a +1. Okay, so that means that I'm just saying this is 4 times 1, which is just 4/5. It's probably the hardest way they've ever gotten an answer of 4/5. Okay, so if there's any part in here that you want to go back to and review, go back and review it, but just most importantly, follow order of operations. You can't distribute when you have an exponent, okay? Make sure that you're careful with your multiplying. Do some side work to find your i's. Try not to get caught like I did a couple of times. If you see an I squared, it's easier just to simplify it right away, but if it's anything other than an I squared, I would perform all the operations because you might end up getting something that looks like, where is it at? There was a problem here somewhere. Oh, you might end up getting a problem that looks like this down here where you have I to the 5th and I to the 5th, and you can combine them so you don't have to do it twice in case you don't catch it. Okay? Alright, so your homework is number 10 worksheet. It's the last worksheet that you're going to have. On Monday when we finish this lesson, we're going to practice a little bit more. Miss Fitzharris will be back on Monday. Hopefully she's kind of sick. But when she comes back, she's going to make sure that she reviews with her class all the stuff that goes along with imaginary. So there's really no new lesson on Monday, so that bodes well for you guys. It's just a bunch of reviewing of imaginary. So we're going to go back and we're going to add, subtract, multiply, divide, and we're going to go back and even simplify radicals with imaginaries. Okay? So your homework looks like this. Find the product of each of them. Then just follow the rules. Do some side work to figure out your i's. If you're having any trouble figuring out your i's, make sure that you ask somebody who maybe does know. Okay? Good luck as you work through this. Have a good weekend.